Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third Ask Me Anything about climate change in Greeley, sponsored by Cooler. Cooler is a National Science Foundation funded initiative aimed at developing a learning ecosystem in northern Colorado to strengthen climate change resilience. I want to thank our behind the scenes person, Erika, for helping out with some of the technology today and always. She's amazing. And my name is Kennedy DeChant, and I'm a student and active. Well, I was a student. I just graduated at Earth Guardians at UNCO, and I was a member of Earth Guardians. And today we have Dr. Romulo, who is a professor and one of the faculty members of Cooler. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Kennedy.
Yeah. So, with this event, we hope to help anyone watching learn more about climate change and especially how it relates to Northern Colorado. And any audience members out there, if you have any questions about our topic today, feel free to type them in the chat and Dr. Romulo will do her best to answer them. So, to start us off, we have a question that we like to ask all of our guests. Can you describe how your work connects with climate change?
Sure. And like Kennedy said, I work in ecosystem or natural resource management. So that's basically
Mhm.
like what are the activities that we do as humans to change or maintain our landscapes. And I do research in that area. So as a faculty member at a university, I don't actually get to be in charge of a lot of things. Like I'm not part of the Forest Service or anything like that. So I don't manage the land directly, but I study how we can make good decisions. And what's really interesting with the connection between that work and climate change is usually what we try to do is understand how things have happened in the past. So we'll look at rainfall patterns and see what do we expect for how much water we're going to have. And then that means this we can plant a certain type of plants, or we can need to be aware of when there might be flooding. But as the climate is changing, the biggest thing that has an impact on what we do is that the past is no longer a good predictor of the future. And so what we used to do is look at our measurements, make a decision, and now we can't quite do that. And so it makes a
Mhm.
lot of things uncertain in our decision making.
Yes. Yeah, that can be very scary. I guess the first question that pops into my head with that is how do we tackle the uncertainty? Maybe you can speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads to kind of a discussion about what are the best practices of how we do
Mhm.
ecosystem management. So I teach a class that is about a strategy called adaptive management, and it probably has a few different names. But the idea is that once you make a decision about what you're doing, so let's say you have a schedule for planting, for harvesting trees, or anything like that, you actually need to do continual monitoring and evaluation if those actions are meeting your goals so that you can shift. And so that is actually a really different way than a lot of like government systems tend to work, where you make a decision, you have a policy, for example, and then that's how you do things. So here in Colorado, a really good example is how we manage the Colorado River.
Mhm.
In 1922, we allocated a certain amount of water, a volume, to all these different entities and said, that's how much you get every year. But it
Mhm.
turns out we don't get the same amount of water every year, and it's actually changing quite a bit from that 1922 measurement. And so if we had an adaptive management strategy, we would say, okay, every so often we would look at what's actually happening in the river and then reallocate that
Mhm.
volume of water. But we don't, that's not how we really do things, or how we've traditionally done things. And so that
Mhm.
shift over to a more adaptive management style can be quite difficult.
Mm. Yeah, definitely, especially since it's not exactly how we've done things historically. Do you feel like there's kind of a move to this adaptive management style in terms of ecological management?
definitely in the field of conservation, right? And
Hmm.
so, in what we do, there's a lot of folks who are like, okay, we need to really understand what's happening to the land. And when we talk about an evidence-based decision, those decisions change with more evidence, right? Medicine works like this. We learn a new thing and then we say, okay, we're going to shift our recommendations for people or shift how we
Hmm.
treat something because we learned more. And so in that way, we are doing things that are more adaptive. The place where there's really a big struggle is the political boundaries that we have for our land are not really adaptable or shiftable, right? And so,
Hmm.
for example, we have national parks like Joshua Tree National Park, right? Because of a changing climate, the range of Joshua trees is actually moving north out of
Mm.
the park. So at some point in the future, it could be possible that Joshua Tree National Park doesn't have as many Joshua trees, and all the Joshua trees are north of there. And so, what do you do? Because that's like private land, somebody else owns it, right? You can't just
Hmm.
shift the boundaries of the national park to adapt to the changing climate. So, yeah, it's complicated.
Yes, that's a really interesting example. National parks is quite yeah, that's interesting. Um, okay, so what are this is maybe shifting topics. Well, it's not shifting topics, but going a different route. What is something people can do in their everyday lives to better manage ecological systems? And maybe it does kind of touch on what you just said, because if national parks move into private land, what do people do? Stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, um, you know, and something similar has recently happened where in Washington, D.C., they have a cherry blossom festival every year, right?
Mm,
And so you need to schedule a festival earlier than like the day before so people can know to come to the festival. And the problem is that if you're going to have a cherry blossom festival, you want the festival to be when the cherry trees are blossoming, ideally, right? And so the problem is that the cherry trees are blossoming at a different time of year than they used to be. So they're less predictable, like what I talked about with that past no longer being a good predictor of the future. And so this year, the Park Service kind of missed the guess or the
mm,
estimate or the prediction of when the cherry trees are blossoming. So they blossom like like the week before the festival. And people were really angry because they came for the festival and the trees were not as amazing and full of
yeah.
blossoms as they usually are. And so, one thing I would say is cut folks a little bit of slack. It's kind of like a new thing to try to I mean, the fact that we can even estimate when the blossoms will be blossoming at all with any kind of accuracy is amazing. I mean, we're telling the future
True.
in that case. So that's one little thing is just be kind to your ecologists who are trying very hard to get you a very beautiful festival. But the other thing is that there's a thing called the ecological footprint. And the
Mm,
idea is you think about how all of the activities that you do have an impact or footprint on the earth.
mhm.
And you think about how big you might want that footprint to be. And sometimes it's easier to think about
Yeah.
one piece of it, like your water footprint. So if you're the kind of person that likes to take super long showers or you buy products that use a lot of water to produce them, it takes a little bit of work to figure out. Like rubber takes a lot of
Yeah.
water. So if you're a runner and you need to change your shoes very frequently because that's important for your
Mm,
body, then you can cut back on water use in other areas, right? Meat
mm,
consumption takes a lot of water. So if you want to eat a lot of meat, maybe you do less of those other things, right? I
yeah.
um, have a very small lawn area because I live in Colorado. So I don't want to spend a lot of my water footprint watering the lawn, take short showers,
Mhm.
things like that. And so that way I think about, okay, how am I using my water and where do I want to use my water so that I'm not just having a really huge impact on water on the earth.
Yeah. That's yeah, very nice. And I like that it's kind of like a checks and balance system. If you're not able to cut out all of the, you know, harmful things, then you can at least do a little bit at a time.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's one of those
yeah.
things where it's a trade-off, right? And it's
Yeah.
not that everybody has to do the same thing or do everything really intensely, but
Mhm.
just if you think about okay, what are the impacts that I'm having and what am I willing to cut down on and what's really important to me and how do I pick and choose? That's something to consider.
Yeah.
The caveat there is that, don't beat yourself up, like be kind to yourself
Mhm.
about your impacts, because
Yeah.
there are a lot of people in huge industries that have really, really big impacts on the world and on our ecosystems. So don't be too
Yes.
harsh on yourself.
Yeah, it's a very intertwined system that we're all a part of. So, yeah. Are there any programs in the city of Greeley that are like aligned with, um, I guess, yeah, helping just residents do the right thing, cut back on water, stuff like that?
Absolutely. So there's two that come to mind. One
Hmm.
is that the city of Greeley uses what's called a water budget for how they charge people for their water use. So the way the water budget works is that they take a look at your property and they see how much of your area is soil, basically, or pervious surface, and they
Hmm.
look at how many people are living in your house. And then so they have a calculation. So each person is allocated a certain amount of water, and then you get a certain amount for the yard area that you have, basically. So then you have a budget. So they calculate an amount that um, each household can have that's relative to the household conditions. If you go above your water budget,
Hmm.
then your bill is really high. But if you stay within your water budget, then your bill is much lower. And you can decide how you want to use that water, right? So like
Hmm.
I don't have very much lawn. I have a lot of dry landscaping, but I have a pond. So I put water in my pond, but I
Hmm.
stay within my water budget, and that's how I want to use my water. And so it gives people the freedom to use their
Hmm.
water how they want, but the idea is that you stay within your water footprint or your water budget. The second one is that Greeley
Yeah.
actually has a program called Life After Lawn that will pay you to convert your lawn area to drought tolerant landscaping. And so if you just Google
Yeah.
Life After Lawn Garden Series, you can get involved. There's some workshops to help you do that. So that's a really great program. So I took out my whole front lawn. I live in Greeley, and
Hmm.
it's all vegetable beds and drought tolerant landscaping. And drought tolerant landscaping can be very beautiful. Like right now, I have a ton of plants that are all purple. So native purple
Hmm.
penstemon, purple lupine, purple columbine, and like all my front yard is purple right now. It's very beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, that's awesome. And the produce that you can grow if you kind of go that direction with your lawn. I feel like for any gardeners that are watching, consider this. Google it. Cool. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your career path to where you are now, but also like any routes people can take if they're interested in conservation or ecological management.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say there's sometimes folks can have some assumptions or perceptions about what it means to work in ecology or
Hmm.
conservation, right? And so the first thing I'll say is you can do anything day to day and work in conservation, right? So if you look
Yes.
at our conservation organizations or even the government sector, there's like accountants and computer scientists and cybersecurity analysts and social media people. And so, if you have a skill set or a thing you like to do, but you want to apply it to conservation and ecology, there's definitely a way for you to do that. So you do not have to be
Hmm.
like trudging through the forest every day. I personally like that. That's how I got into it. But it's not for everybody to be like out in the
Yeah.
elements for long periods of time. And like that could be really hard on your body, and especially like you're
Yeah.
getting older or you have family obligations, like that field lifestyle doesn't make sense for everybody, but it totally
Mhm.
works if that is the way that you want to go into it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that um, just a general recommendation, especially for students, is once you start thinking about a discipline or field or type of job you want to go into, I would start looking at the jobs immediately. Like you're not ready, especially if you're a freshman, you're in high school, you're not ready to
Mhm.
apply for that job, but it gives you an idea of the skill set they're looking for. So if you say, okay, I really love working on the computers and I really want to work for a conservation organization, but I want to do computer work. If you
Mm.
go, you'll see that there's a lot of work to be done in database management, right? So I
Mhm.
see those kinds of jobs coming up a lot in conservation organizations. If you look at government jobs, work doing resource management for like BLM, Forest Service, things like that, they need a lot of analysts, people who can do statistics and help
Mm.
them with that evidence-based decision making part, right? And so it gives you an idea of what kinds of things that they're hiring for and what skill set that you could develop as a student or in other jobs that you could then apply to those organizations.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you for that little, just in case anyone's interested, I know that it's very broad and I just wanted to,
Yeah.
show everyone, the options.
And if anybody has a question,
Yeah.
you can email me. So my email is
Yeah.
chelsea.romulo@unco.edu. And so I get questions all the times from folks. You don't have to
Mhm.
be my student. It's fine. So just send me an
Yeah.
email. I'll try to get you pointed in the right direction.
Yes, Dr. Romulo is like a walking resource book. I don't know, she knows everyone, so has so many opportunities. But yeah, okay. From an audience member, well, Erika actually. Thanks, Erika. How is ecological or species diversity in northern Colorado being affected by climate change, and how does that affect us?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with trees because they're kind of like big things that we see. And I read a study a few years ago that was looking at the heat tolerance of different tree species. And so some of the species that we have here in Colorado are very heat tolerant. So as the climate gets warmer, they'll actually be okay. So that's good news. So not every species is impacted the same way. Other species are very sensitive to heat, and I think I can relate to that. I run hot, and I'm so uncomfortable when it's hot, and so I'm like one of those trees
Yeah.
that's like just welts when it's hot. um so that's going to be
Yeah.
me. I'll be struggling. And so what one of the things that we can expect is that the composition of our forest will change over time. And so something
Mhm.
that can happen is we already know we've got an issue with forest fires and that we're losing trees to fire. We have an issue with pine bark beetles, which are taking out specifically our conifers. Although that might be leveling out. They've been very aggressive for many years, and they may have been so
Mm.
aggressive that now there's not as much of their preferred food trees. But what that
Mm.
means is that in addition to the pine bark beetles and the forest fires, we're also losing trees just because of heat tolerance. And that's a
Mhm.
problem for us because the trees are a really important part of a healthy ecosystem and a healthy watershed, right? A healthy forest means good, clean
Um,
water for us, and most of us get our water from the mountains. It's also where we
mhm.
recreate, right? Like when you think about the Colorado mountains, you
Yes.
think about a heavily forested mountainside. And so we don't want to see a future where that is completely different and we don't have the healthy forests to clean our water. And
Mhm.
so we want to make sure that we're managing the forest in a way that we can still have a healthy forest, that the species who can thrive there continue to thrive there.
Yeah, that is, yes, very true. I go to the Pooter a lot, and it's really amazing to see, and it would be very, very sad if there was like a massive change. So, yeah. Okay. Well, this one's kind of a fun question, but are there any, I guess, do you have like a fun story or a favorite field experience? Like you said that you mentioned trampling through forests, doing this kind of work. Is there anything along those lines that you'd like to share?
Oh, just a fun field experience. Um,
Yes, just
sure.
something.
So,
Yeah.
I'll share a fun one. And I did some research in the Amazon rainforest.
Mhm.
And when I was doing
Cool.
my doctorate, I guess I'll actually touch back on the question you had about what do you recommend for people who'd like to explore a career path. Sometimes, and
Yeah.
especially like when you're at those transition points, right? You graduated high school and you're going to declare a major and pick a
Mhm.
college. You graduate from college and you're going to apply for and say yes to a job. It kind of feels like you're setting yourself on some sort of path or trajectory and saying no to all those other options. Well, you still have lots of options and you can change whatever it is you're doing at any point in time, and it's totally fine. I give you permission if you're the kind of
Mhm.
person who needs to have permission to do that. So so I was working at Amazon. Now I don't work at the Amazon, and I would love to go back, but
Mhm.
I have so many other things that I'm doing. I do education research. I'm using drones to study the hill slopes of eroding hill slopes in outside of Boulder. It's whatever
Mhm.
you're doing. If you decide you're going to change gears, totally fine. So I was in the
Yeah.
Amazon rainforest, and I was there with a much more senior researcher, somebody who's much more experienced in the field. And it was my first time in this particular area. And so it's always
Mhm.
exciting to potentially see, a wild animal, especially a rare one. And so this other researcher said, what would be like your favorite thing to see if we were to see
Sure.
something while we're out here for a few weeks? And I was like, wow, I'd
Mhm.
really like to see a tapir. So a tapir is
Mhm.
um uh it's related to like cow or related no, it's related to like rhinoceros and horses. It's in like a really weird group of
Oh,
animals, but it's a very large land animal, and it has like a very
mhm.
long, like wiggly nose. And the ones they have in this area are like an Oreo cookie. So like the front and back is black and the middle is white.
Wow.
And so it's just a really cool looking animal. And I said I would
Mhm.
like to see that. And he was like, "Oh, they are so rare. We are not going to see a tapir." And I was like, "But you just asked me like what I'd want to see, like not if we thought I was going to see it." So I just answered. And the next morning, a tapir ran through our camp. Like, I mean,
That's
they're
so
so
awesome.
large. It's actually like
Yeah.
it could be quite destructive. And it ran through and then it swam across the river. And he was like,
Wow.
"You just like manifested that tapir." And I was like, "I know. You
Oh
just
my
asked me what I wanted to
gosh.
see." And so that was a really cool experience. So it's always, fun to see these cool
Yes.
things. And, here in
Yeah.
Colorado, there's a lot of initiatives to bring back species that we historically have.
Mhm.
Wolves they've been working on wolf
Yeah.
reintroduction, which is a bit contentious, but more recently, they're working on wolverines. So,
Mm.
very, very rare species that live up in the mountains that we're kind of bringing back to our ecosystem.
Wow. Okay, awesome. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing. We have a question from our audience. What are some of the simplest first steps a local resident or homeowner could take to promote ecological diversity in their yard or neighborhood?
Yeah, absolutely. And so
Yeah.
so when we think about ecological diversity, um, and when we think about like species or nature, a lot of times people think about those big animals like the tapir, or here in Colorado it's like moose, bear, elk, like those big things. But in my yard, I try to plant a lot of native plants because Colorado has over 400 pollinator species, like a
Mhm.
crazy amount of bees and other insects that pollinate our plants. And when you convert too much of the natural landscape, the natural species, to things like a lawn or plants that are not native, then we stop being able to support all of those native species. And so I would
Yeah.
encourage you to start planting some natives. We have some really beautiful ones. You oftentimes don't have to water them that much, so that's like an added bonus.
Mhm.
And they tend to have, the perennials at least, have very, very extensive root systems, so they'll actually make your soil a lot healthier. There's a lot of places in Greeley and close to Greeley where you can get native plants. So the
Mhm.
West Greeley Conservation District does a native plant sale every year. In Loveland, there's the High Plains Environmental Center, and actually one of our alum is now assistant manager of the greenhouse there. So shout out
Oh,
to
cool.
Bailey. Hello. um, and so there's a lot of places you can get native plants. I think our city also has a discount if you buy a garden in a box with some
Mm.
drought tolerant, which has natives mixed in with other species, and they're from an organization in Boulder. But that's a really great thing that you can do in your yard. And it's also, to me, it's like very interesting. I love seeing all the different
Yeah.
native flowers, and you can definitely arrange your garden, which is what I have done, so that you have flowers like all spring and summer. So
Yeah. It's so yeah, I feel like the possibilities are endless once you get into it. It's super cool. Yeah. Okay, we have another question from the audience, and I think this might be the question we'll end on. We'll see how we end up on time. But how does cooler work with ecological management?
that's a good question because, like I said
Hmm.
at the very beginning, we're a group of faculty, students, interested community members, community activators, but it's not like any of us are in a position where we own or manage the land. So I don't actually get to make the decision about how any piece of land in Greeley or Colorado is managed. But we work really closely with those folks. So, for example,
Mhm.
Dr. Bywater Rays, who was in the AMA last month, and I were on the planning group for the City of Greeley Natural Areas and Master Plan, right? And so we sat
Mhm.
with them and gave them our expert opinions and helped them work through, how do we develop a good plan for our natural areas here in Greeley, right? And so that's how we participate. So we work closely with the city, the county, the state, and provide our expertise. And that's not something that they usually pay for us to be on like a planning committee like that. It's
Mhm.
part of our job as a university faculty, which is a really
Mhm.
cool thing. I'm also on the
Yeah.
board of the Poudre Heritage Alliance, which manages Cache la Poudre River Natural Heritage Area. So in that capacity, I also do things like review grants. So when people apply for grants to do ecological stuff, I'm on the
Mhm.
board who reviews that, or I make recommendations to the committee or to people who get grants and things like that, based on my area of expertise.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing all of this information with us today. Before we end our Facebook Live, we're going to throw our social media links in the chat. We obviously have a Facebook. We also have an Instagram, LinkedIn, and a website and a mailing list. So sign up for our mailing list if you want to. It's just once a month. It gives you all the updates and some cool things that are going on in Greeley, maybe with other community organizations. Um, yes, and then we have our next Facebook Live planned as well with Katara Barola, and that one is going to be on June 20th at 1:30 tentatively. We're pretty sure, but yeah. And it's going to be about Indigenous representation within land decisions and climate change. So that one's going to be super cool. And it's our guests so far have been from Cooler, and now we're gonna get into some other community organizations, which will be super exciting. So, anyways, thank you, Dr. Romulo. This was super fun. So I
Thanks for
hope you had
having
a good
me.
time. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. Okay. Well, bye everyone who's watching. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.